"Sir, customers aren't allowed beyond this section." That sentence echoed through the polished showroom like a warning shot. Conversation slowed. A woman standing beside the coffee station lifted her eyes from her phone. Two businessmen stopped talking mid-sentence. Even the receptionist froze. Standing near the display model of a Bombardier Global 7500 was a tall black man wearing worn jeans, a weathered Carhartt jacket, and heavy rubber fishing boots still marked with salt and dried mud from the Louisiana coast. Ryan Mitchell, Falcon Crest Aviation's top salesman, took one look at him and decided exactly who he was. And in Ryan Mitchell's world, men who looked like that did not buy $80 million airplanes. "Excuse me," the stranger said calmly. "I'd like to see the Global 7500. For a moment, Ryan thought he had heard wrong. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the laugh of a man enjoying a good joke. It was the kind of laugh designed to make someone feel small. The kind that invited others to join in. And within seconds, several people around the showroom were smiling. "Buddy," Ryan said loudly, "that aircraft costs more than most people make in 10 lifetimes." Another chuckle left his mouth. "You sure you didn't wander into the wrong building?" A few customers smirked. Nobody said a word. Nobody came to the stranger's defense. Nobody knew that before sunset, the same man standing there in muddy fishing boots would walk away from Falcon Crest Aviation with $80 million ready to spend. And nobody imagined that Ryan Mitchell's laughter would soon become the sound that destroyed his career. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome to our difference. Every week we bring you stories about dignity, strength, and the people the world underestimated. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's get back to Elijah Carter, because what happens next, nobody in that showroom saw coming. To understand what happened that day, you first have to understand Elijah Carter. Because Ryan Mitchell saw the boots, he saw the jacket, he saw the rough hands, but he never saw the man. Every morning for the past 30 years, Elijah Carter had awakened long before sunrise. Not because an alarm demanded it, but because the Gulf of Mexico had its own schedule, and the ocean never cared how much money a man had. At 4 o'clock each morning, while most people slept peacefully beneath warm blankets, Elijah was already standing on the dock behind his property outside Morgan City, Louisiana, watching the dark water move beneath the moonlight. The smell of salt filled the air. Seagulls cried somewhere overhead. Fishing boats rocked gently against their ropes, and somewhere beyond the horizon, another day's work was waiting. Elijah's family had been shrimp fishermen for generations. His grandfather had done it. His father had done it. And as a young man, Elijah had done exactly the same. He had spent thousands of mornings throwing nets, repairing engines, and fighting storms that seemed determined to swallow entire boats. He knew what exhaustion felt like. He knew what poverty felt like, and he knew what it meant to lose almost everything. Because when Hurricane Katrina struck years earlier, it had nearly destroyed his family's entire livelihood. Boats vanished, warehouses flooded, businesses closed, friends moved away and never came back, but Elijah Carter stayed, and instead of giving up, he rebuilt. While others saw only destruction, Elijah saw something different. He saw a problem nobody was solving. Seafood companies all across the Gulf Coast shared one common struggle: transportation. Fresh seafood spoiled quickly. Delivery delays cost millions. Many small fishermen had no reliable way to ship their products efficiently. Elijah began solving that problem himself. First with one refrigerated truck, then 3, then 10. He drove routes himself in the early years, learning every highway from Louisiana to Georgia. He learned patience the way a fisherman learns the ocean, not from a book, but from years of early mornings and difficult lessons. Within a decade, Carter Coastal Logistics had become one of the largest seafood transportation companies in the entire South. His refrigerated fleet moved fresh products from Louisiana to Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Major restaurant chains signed long-term contracts. Cruise lines partnered with him. Luxury resorts in 4 states depended on his deliveries, and eventually his company expanded overseas. By the time he turned 58, Elijah Carter was worth over $400 million. But almost nothing about him had changed. He still drove an old Ford F-250, still drank black coffee, still ate breakfast at the same diner every Saturday morning, still wore rubber boots. Still spent sunrise walking the docks, talking to workers, watching the water move. And he never felt the need to dress like a billionaire just to prove something to strangers. Because Elijah had learned a truth that very few wealthy people ever accept. Money changes a lot of people, but it shouldn't change the person you see in the mirror. For 6 months, Elijah had been researching the Bombardier Global 7500, not because he wanted luxury or attention. His business operations now stretched across multiple states and several countries, and commercial airlines had become a serious problem. Layovers, delays, missed meetings, canceled connections. Lost hours that could never be recovered. Time mattered more than almost anything in a business built on freshness and speed, and Elijah valued time more than he valued money. Rebecca Hayes, his chief financial officer, had already reviewed the numbers and approved the purchase 3 weeks earlier. The funds were sitting ready. All Elijah needed to do was choose a final configuration and confirm delivery schedules. So on a clear Thursday morning, after finishing his usual walk along the docks, Elijah climbed into his dusty truck and pointed it toward Atlanta. No appointment, no assistant, no bodyguards. No designer suit, just a man who had spent the morning around shrimp boats and seawater, driving 6 hours to spend $80 million. He called Rebecca from the highway near the Mississippi border. "Rebecca," he said, "I'm heading to Atlanta today to finalize the Global 7500. Just want you reachable later if I need to move quickly." "Of course," she said, "everything is ready. The full amount is approved and waiting for your word." "Good," he said, "I'll be in touch." He hung up and turned the radio back on. Country music drifted through the cab, and Elijah spent most of the drive thinking about nothing except fuel range and cabin configuration. When he finally arrived at Falcon Crest Aviation, the contrast between his truck and the parking lot almost looked amusing. Mercedes, Porsches, Range Rovers, Bentleys. And in the middle of all that luxury sat his 10-year-old Ford pickup, still carrying traces of salt spray and dried mud. Elijah smiled, then stepped out. Falcon Crest Aviation was designed to impress. Glass walls, polished marble floors, soft jazz through hidden speakers, aircraft models gleaming under professional lighting. Everything arranged to make wealthy people feel comfortable spending enormous amounts of money. But Elijah had never cared much for appearances. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. And immediately something shifted, not dramatically, just enough to feel it. Conversation slowed, eyes lifted. People glanced once, then glanced again. Elijah walked toward the reception desk. The young receptionist smiled automatically, but the smile adjusted slightly when her eyes reached his boots. "Can I help you, sir?" Before Elijah could answer, Ryan Mitchell appeared from across the floor. Ryan moved through the showroom the way a man moves through a room he believes belongs to him. 46 years old. Hair perfectly in place, a tailored navy suit, a silver watch catching the light. And the practiced smile of someone who had spent 15 years separating people with money from the people who were simply browsing. For 4 straight years, Ryan had been Falcon Crest Aviation's top salesman. He prided himself on reading people before they even spoke. Shoes, watches, cars, the way a person carried themselves. And after one glance at Elijah Carter, Ryan believed the math was simple. "Morning, my friend," Ryan said, too warmly. "You looking for somebody?" "No," Elijah replied. "I'm looking at the Global 7500. Ryan blinked, then smiled wider. "The Global 7500. Yes, the $80 million aircraft. Yes, I've studied the specifications." "Really?" "Range, 7,700 nautical miles. Passenger capacity, 19, top speed, Mach .925. Ryan's smile tightened. The answers had come too quickly, too cleanly. But instead of pausing to reconsider his assumption, Ryan chose to protect it. He raised his voice loud enough for the floor to hear. "Stephen, you need to hear this. The gentleman here wants the Global 7500. A few chuckles spread through the showroom. Ryan grinned. "You sure you don't mean the simulator display downstairs?" More laughter. Elijah remained still and said nothing. "Buddy, people don't just walk in here hoping to buy $80 million airplanes." "I'm aware of the price," Elijah said. "I'd like to see the configurations." And that was the moment Ryan Mitchell made the decision that would eventually ruin his life. Because instead of showing respect, he chose performance. He chose humiliation as entertainment. And once humiliation becomes a performance, there is always an audience. And audiences, Elijah Carter had learned long ago, eventually become witnesses. With a smile that looked friendly from a distance, Ryan placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder and slowly guided him away from the Bombardier display toward another section of the showroom where smaller aircraft were presented. His voice carried the tone of a man doing someone a great favor as he pointed out more practical options for small business owners. Elijah stopped walking. He calmly removed Ryan's hand from his shoulder. There was no anger in his expression and no embarrassment in his eyes. If anything, there was patience. The deep-settled patience of a man who had spent decades working beside the ocean and learned that storms reveal themselves without needing any help. "I appreciate the suggestion," Elijah said quietly. "But I didn't drive all the way from Louisiana to discuss aircraft I have no interest in. I came to talk about the Global 7500. I'd like to review the configurations and delivery schedules." Ryan crossed his arms and glanced around at the customers watching. The audience only encouraged him. "Before we go any further," Ryan said, his voice cooling, "I'll need proof of funds. A bank statement, a verification letter, something that shows we're not wasting each other's time." From across the room, a young salesman named Marcus Reed looked up sharply. 28 years old, 8 months into the job. He had watched Ryan give tour of multi-million-dollar aircraft to walk-in customers dozens of times without ever asking for a single document. Yet somehow today, standard practice had suddenly changed. "Do you ask everyone for proof of funds before showing them a brochure?" Elijah asked softly. Ryan shrugged. "It's company policy." It wasn't. Marcus knew it. Several employees knew it. Even Stephen Harper, the floor manager, knew it. But silence disguises itself as neutrality. It convinces people that choosing not to act somehow means they are uninvolved. Stephen chose silence, and in doing so, he chose a side. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Elijah said. Ryan laughed. "You're looking at him? Stephen backs every decision I make on this floor." As if on cue, Stephen glanced over and gave a slow, confirming nod before returning to his tablet. The message was delivered. The wall was complete. Several customers pretended not to notice, but pretending not to see something doesn't erase it from the room. A woman near the espresso station exchanged an uncomfortable look with her husband. Two businessmen quietly lifted their phones. One younger employee lowered his eyes and busied himself with paperwork. He wasn't actually reading. Meanwhile, a member of the cleaning crew appeared and began mopping the floor around Elijah's boots with exaggerated attention to the faint traces of mud. The message couldn't have been clearer if it had been spoken aloud. Ryan stepped closer and lowered his voice just enough to create the illusion of privacy, while making sure everyone nearby heard every word. "Let me tell you something," he said, with a smile that no longer contained any warmth. "I've spent 15 years selling aircraft. I know buyers the moment they walk through those doors. I can tell by the shoes, by the watch, by the car, by the way a person talks. And forgive me for being direct, but you don't look like someone shopping for an $80 million airplane." His eyes dropped toward Elijah's boots. "You smell like salt water and diesel. Honestly, you look like you spent the night unloading shrimp off a dock somewhere." Several people laughed nervously. Ryan smiled wider. "And maybe you did, nothing wrong with that, but this isn't a tourist attraction. These airplanes aren't here for daydreamers." The words hung in the air. Nobody interrupted. Nobody objected. Nobody said that was enough. Marcus Reed felt something tighten in his chest. Every instinct told him to stand up and end it, but fear held him in place. He was new. Ryan Mitchell was the most powerful voice on the sales floor. One word from Ryan could make the next 2 years of his career very difficult. But as Marcus watched Elijah standing alone under the bright showroom lights, something inside him began to shift. Because the man being humiliated wasn't reacting the way most people would. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't defensive. He was simply standing there with the dignity of someone who knew exactly what he was worth, and had no intention of lowering himself to match someone else's behavior. Ryan mistook that dignity for weakness. Arrogant people almost always do. He pulled a chair from beside the reception desk and deliberately placed it directly between Elijah and the Global 7500 display. Then with exaggerated ease he sat down, crossed his legs, and leaned back. A human barrier. as if the airplane needed protecting from a man who had done nothing more than ask to see it. A few uncomfortable laughs moved through the room. "You know what I think?" Ryan said, loud enough for everyone. "I think you drove past this place, saw some beautiful airplanes through the window, and decided it might be fun to come inside and pretend for a little while. Nothing wrong with that. Everyone's got dreams, but dreams don't buy aircraft. Money does." Still, Elijah Carter remained calm. After nearly 30 minutes of this, he finally spoke again. His voice was quiet, not weak. Not angry, just steady and clear. "I drove 6 hours to get here," he said. "I came prepared to spend $80 million. I've memorized the specifications. I discussed this purchase with my financial team weeks ago, and all I have asked for since I walked through that door is to be treated like a customer." Ryan shook his head and smiled with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "Then maybe come back when you've got something other than muddy boots and a dream in your pocket." The laughter that followed was quieter than before, not because people found it funny, but because some of them had begun to feel the weight of what they had just participated in. And near the back of the showroom, Marcus Reed noticed something nobody else seemed to catch. Throughout the entire ordeal, Elijah Carter had never once looked embarrassed. He had never raised his voice. He had never defended himself with anger. He had simply watched the room with patience. The kind of patience that belongs to someone who already knows exactly how the story ends. And as Elijah slowly reached into his jacket pocket, Ryan Mitchell smiled. Convinced the fisherman from Louisiana had finally accepted defeat. He had no idea what the next few minutes would do to everything he had spent 15 years building. Elijah removed his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Rebecca," he said in the same easy tone he had used all morning. "I'm at Falcon Crest Aviation in Atlanta. Go ahead and initiate the wire transfer for the Global 7500, full amount. The $80 million configuration we discussed." He waited a moment. "Thank you." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Ryan overheard enough to laugh one more time, though the sound was noticeably flatter than before. "Well, that's creative," he called out. "You almost had me there, but something in the room had shifted, like the change in air pressure just before a storm arrives." 3 minutes passed. Then the receptionist's computer chimed. She glanced at the screen and froze. Her eyes widened. She leaned in closer, read it once, then again, then a third time. "Mr. Harper," she said quietly. Stephen Harper walked over expecting a routine problem. But as he read the email on the screen, every drop of color left his face. Attached to the message was a letter from Rebecca Hayes, Chief Financial Officer of Carter Coastal Logistics, formally outlining the full purchase of a customized Bombardier Global 7500. Below that was documentation confirming the $80 million wire transfer had already been approved and was ready to move. And below that was the company's current liquid account balance. $340 million. Stephen grabbed the edge of the desk. His knuckles went pale. "Ryan," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his own. "Ryan, come here." Ryan walked over slowly, but the moment his eyes hit the screen, the smile vanished from his face completely, not slowly, all at once, like a light switched off. He read the numbers once, then again. Then a third time. $80 million, already approved, $340 million remaining. For the first time in 15 years of selling, Ryan Mitchell had nothing to say. The showroom sensed it without being told. Conversations went quiet. Coffee cups stopped midway to mouths. Even the jazz through the speakers felt suddenly distant. Stephen quickly typed Elijah Carter's name into a search engine. What appeared made his hands shake. Founder of Carter Coastal Logistics. Owner of one of the largest seafood transportation networks in the American South. Supplier to international cruise lines and luxury resort chains across 4 countries. Featured in Forbes magazine. Estimated net worth exceeding $400 million. Stephen swallowed hard and walked across the showroom toward Elijah. There was an expression on his face that his employees had never seen there before. Fear. "Mr. Carter," he began carefully, "I believe there has been a terrible misunderstanding today." Elijah looked at him calmly. "All I wanted," he said softly, "was to be treated like a customer. Of course, sir, we can start fresh right now. Ryan would be happy to personally know." The single word stopped everything. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It moved through the room like quiet thunder. Elijah looked slowly around the showroom, at the people who had laughed, at the customers who had recorded, at the employees who had stayed silent, and finally at Ryan Mitchell, who could no longer raise his eyes. "I've spent my life on the water," Elijah said. "I've survived hurricanes. I've rebuilt after losing almost everything. I've worked beside men who had nothing left and still showed kindness to strangers. But what happened here today had nothing to do with airplanes. Nobody moved. This was about respect." His eyes settled on Ryan. "You didn't laugh at my clothes, Ryan. You laughed at what you decided I was, and the saddest part is that you never once thought to ask who I actually am." Ryan lowered his head. The same boots he had mocked were standing on the same polished marble floor he had guarded so proudly all morning, and those faint marks of mud looked entirely different now. "I won't be buying anything from Falcon Crest Aviation," Elijah said. "Not today, not ever." He turned and walked to the exit without another word. And for the second time that morning, complete silence filled the showroom. Only this time, nobody was laughing. The glass doors closed behind him, and panic took over. Stephen Harper pulled Ryan into his office. Voices rose behind the glass walls. Employees exchanged looks. Rumors moved across the floor in seconds, but Marcus Reed wasn't watching any of it. He had opened his laptop and started typing. He documented everything. The moment Ryan redirected Elijah to the cheaper section, the false claim about company policy, the request for proof of funds no other customer had received that day, the chair placed deliberately as a barrier, the comments about shrimp boats and daydreams, the laughter, and most importantly, the silence from the people who saw everything and said nothing, because Marcus had realized something sitting at that desk while fear held him still. Doing nothing is still a decision, and silence leaves fingerprints. He filed a formal written complaint before the end of business that day. Meanwhile, Elijah drove back toward Louisiana with the radio playing low. He wasn't angry. Disappointed, yes, but not angry. People had underestimated him his whole life, banks early in his career. Restaurants, dealerships, he had dealt with all of it, but what happened at Falcon Crest Aviation was different. Ryan Mitchell hadn't simply misjudged a customer. He had turned another man's humiliation into a performance. He had invited an audience. He had made a show of it, and shows leave recordings. That evening, Elijah called Amanda Blake, an investigative journalist he had met at a business conference a few years earlier. He told her what had happened. Calmly and factually, the way he did most things. And just before hanging up, he mentioned something he had nearly forgotten. His phone had been recording audio from the moment he stepped through the doors of Falcon Crest Aviation. He had enabled it years ago after a contract dispute with a supplier who later claimed a conversation had never taken place. The habit had stayed with him. Amanda was quiet for several seconds. Then she asked, "Mr. Carter, would you be willing to tell your story on camera?" "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said. "I believe I would." Within 24 hours, Falcon Crest Aviation's corporate office reached out privately. They offered apologies, discounts, VIP treatment, and promises of internal review. Elijah politely declined. 3 days later, Amanda Blake's investigation aired on a national platform, and the country listened. People heard Ryan Mitchell's laughter. They heard the insults word for word. They heard the silence from the showroom floor. And millions of people heard one sentence that spread across every social media platform within hours. "Maybe come back when you've got something other than muddy boots and a dream in your pocket." By the following morning, multiple hashtags were trending nationally. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Civil rights organizations issued statements and demanded accountability. Former clients of Falcon Crest Aviation came forward with stories that sounded painfully familiar. Different names, different cities, different products, but the same assumptions. The same quiet redirections. The same polite smiles covering the same disrespect. Investigators reviewing Falcon Crest's records uncovered patterns that could not be explained away. Minority customers had consistently received shorter consultations and far more requests for financial verification. They had been steered toward lower-priced inventory at rates impossible to dismiss as coincidence. What had happened to Elijah Carter was not an isolated mistake by one careless salesman. It was simply the first time the full picture had been recorded and the full country had been forced to watch. Marcus Reed's written complaint became critical evidence. His documentation was precise, detailed, and time-stamped. His testimony confirmed the account in full. Ryan Mitchell was terminated. Stephen Harper resigned. Falcon Crest Aviation agreed to a multi-million-dollar settlement, accepted mandatory reforms, and entered a period of independent oversight. During those difficult weeks, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He had witnessed every insult. He had heard every joke, and fear had convinced him to remain silent until after the damage was done. Eventually, he contacted Amanda Blake and asked to speak on record, not just as a witness to what Ryan had done, but as someone willing to admit what he himself had failed to do. His honesty resonated with viewers in a way his documentation alone never could have. People understood fear, they understood hesitation, and they understood that courage often arrives a few minutes later than it should. What mattered was that eventually it arrived. Another aviation company offered Marcus a position. Not because of his sales numbers, but because they had watched his testimony and trusted his character. In his first meeting with his new manager, he was told something he never forgot. You stood up when it mattered. Sometimes that's the only qualification that counts. Ryan Mitchell's world collapsed quietly in the months that followed. Job applications ended before they began. His attorney advised him repeatedly that a sincere public apology might begin to repair some of the damage. But pride is a slow poison, and Ryan refused. He told himself the world had overreacted. He kept telling himself that story late at night, long after midnight. But somewhere underneath all of it, he knew the truth. His downfall had not begun when a man in muddy boots walked through a glass door. It had begun the moment he decided another man's dignity was worth less than a good laugh in front of an audience. When reporters asked Elijah what he intended to do with the settlement money, many expected triumph or anger. Instead, he said something quiet. This money can't erase what happened, but maybe it can help build something better. He established the Evelyn Carter Foundation, named for his grandmother, the woman who had first taught him how to mend a net and how to forgive without forgetting. The foundation provided scholarships and business grants for young entrepreneurs along the Gulf Coast, helping families from communities that had worked hard for generations without ever receiving the opportunities others had taken for granted. Because his grandmother had told him something when he was just a boy. When people throw dirt at you, son, don't throw it back, plant something. 8 months after leaving Atlanta with nothing purchased, Elijah Carter finalized the acquisition of his Bombardier Global 7500 through a small aviation brokerage in Savannah, Georgia, run by a woman named Danielle Foster. Danielle greeted him at the door with a warm handshake and a fresh cup of coffee. She never glanced at his boots. She never examined his truck. She asked what configuration he had in mind, listened carefully, and guided him through every option with clear professional knowledge and complete respect. The entire transaction took less than 2 hours. When the aircraft was delivered to a private airfield outside Morgan City several months later, Elijah stood alone on the runway as the sun descended over the Gulf. Warm evening air carried the familiar weight of salt water across the tarmac. Seagulls circled overhead. Somewhere across the water, fishing boats were making their way home after a long day. Elijah stood there for a while and said nothing. Then he climbed the steps and walked aboard his aircraft. As he entered, his boots left a faint mark on the carpet near the entrance. He noticed it. He looked at it for a moment, and he smiled and left it there because some things don't need cleaning. Some things need to stay exactly where they are, so you remember where you came from, what you built, and what it cost to simply be seen. Not that Elijah Carter had money. Not that Ryan Mitchell lost his career. But that every single person who walks through a door carries an invisible story that no one else can read from the outside. A story built from storms weathered, losses absorbed, mornings spent before sunrise, and choices made when no one was watching. And sometimes the person standing quietly in front of you, wearing ordinary clothes and muddy boots, has survived things you cannot imagine, built something you would not believe, and carries more grace in the way they hold their silence than most people will ever find in the loudest room they ever enter. So the next time someone walks into your world looking different from what you expected, pause before you judge. Pause before you laugh. Remember that appearances have never once told the whole story of a person. And remember that respect costs absolutely nothing. But disrespect, as Ryan Mitchell learned, can cost everything. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell us, where are you watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most? Every single comment means the world to this channel. And if you believe that character matters more than appearance, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to our difference so you never miss a story like Elijah's. Until next time, take care of each other, and never underestimate the man whose boots still carry the scent of the sea.